Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Quinn by Iris Johansen. Chapter 5. Joe threw a folded newspaper on the table in front of Eve. The next morning, the media got hold of the story. Interviews with the hunters, descriptions of what they saw in the cave. Damn them. We hadn't yet notified the Bristols that it might be their daughter. We were waiting to check with her dentist. The phones have been ringing off the hook from parents of those kidnapped kids, and we can't even tell them yes or no. Eve opened the newspaper and shook her head. Why didn't they wait? This is cruel. It's a scoop. The reporter wanted to get ahead of the competition. The bastard will do anything for a story. Brian McVeigh. Eve read the byline. I hope he's happy about this ugliness. She looked up at him. How long before you get a confirmation on the dental records? This afternoon? His lips tightened grimly. And the information will not go to Brian McVeigh. We'll leave him so far out in the cold he'll freeze to death. He looked at the files in front of her. Did you find anything? All the children were in the age brackets from 4 to 8. All of them were from middle to high income families. All of them lived in homes and not subdivisions. She looked up. Except Bonnie. I'm poor as dirt, and this is a rental property. It's nicer than anywhere I've lived before, but it doesn't compare with one of those houses in Town Lake or Chestnut Hill subdivisions. And I was very happy when I saw that she didn't make the A-list. That's two things that are different. 3 months between the kidnappings and the kind of place where she lived. It may not seem a lot to you, but to me it's gigantic. It's gigantic to me too, he said gently. Anything else? Not yet. She leaned back in the chair. What about the footprint in the cave? We're working on it. It's not the usual shoe. It's rubberized. A tennis shoe? Not exactly. The pattern is different. We're working on it. We'll get there. I'm not going to a shoe manufacturer downtown. I'm going to go to a shoe manufacturer downtown when I leave here and see if he can identify it. He was glancing through the reports. But first, why don't we go and take a look at these houses? Why? These are the kids' home bases. Children stay close to their home at this age. It's where they may have been kidnapped. But according to the reports, only 2 of the parents think their child was taken from the neighborhood. We'll still take a look, he turned. If you want to go with me. Of course I do. She was beside him in a moment. And to the shoe factory too. He shrugged. Just routine investigation. I should just as well phone you after I finish. Nothing is routine. She got into the car. I've forgotten what that word means. So had Joe. Since the moment he had met her, nothing had been routine or commonplace in his life. Where first? Chestnut Hills, Linda Cantrell. It's in Kennesaw. His brows lifted. You rattled that off. I'm surprised you haven't memorized the address. I have. I've memorized all of them. I'll tell you when we're closer. The houses are all different styles, Eve said. 2 doors, modern cottage. Her gaze wandered over the neat, lush lawn and clipped bushes that surrounded Nita Teller's home. Small, medium, large. As home bases, they have very little in common. They're just pleasant houses in suburban neighborhoods. I think we struck out. Maybe, maybe not. Joe was staring thoughtfully at the house. I can't put my finger on it right now, but something may strike me later. What's next? Janie Bristol. She's the last one in Atlanta. The others are from your list of outside the city. She's about 5 miles from here in Roswell. Do we have time before we go downtown to that shoe company? Joe nodded. We got through these neighborhoods quickly. You had them organized very efficiently. She handed him the address. I put her last. I guess I wasn't very eager to imagine Janie where she was happiest. It hurts after last night. She tilted her head. You're very thoughtful. You do think this was helpful? As I said, sometimes something sticks in your mind, then it comes together later. You're very good at this, aren't you? He smiled. Hell yes. And so modest. I've never lacked an appreciation for my own worth. I see nothing wrong in confidence as long as it's not misplaced. Neither do I. It was the first thing I noticed about you, she said quietly. I wanted the FBI to send an older agent, someone who had worlds of experience and could use it to find Bonnie. I was angry that instead they sent me a young man who acted as if he knew how to shape the world to suit himself. You were good looking, tough, smart, and oozed assurance. I wanted to kick you. I appreciate your restraint. Then I saw something in you, and I thought that maybe it would be okay between us. And it is. He glanced at the address again. The Bristol subdivision should be just ahead. She tensed. Last night I kept thinking of that skeleton in the skull. I couldn't get it out of my mind. I kept thinking how I'd feel if that was all I had left of Bonnie. And it tore you to pieces. Yes, that goes without saying. But I wanted to help the Bristols, and there was nothing that I could do. Her smile was bittersweet. I almost feel as if we're all a family who have been visited by some catastrophic disease and have to nurse each other through it. Joe turned into the subdivision. I think you have enough on your plate without trying to cure all those other victims. There is no cure except catching that monster. I believe we have to... What on earth? Joe muttered a curse as he stomped on the brakes. The street before the Bristol house was full of cars and media vans. 3 ATLPD squad cars were in the driveway. Son of a bitch. Someone must have leaked the information about Janie Bristol to the media. We weren't even supposed to have a dental confirmation until later today. Looks like those reporters are on the family like locusts, Eve said. Can't you keep them away from them? It nearly killed me to have to deal with them after I first lost Bonnie. I can knock a couple of heads together and end up in court. I may do it, but you can't interfere with the freedom of the press. He stiffened as he saw someone get out of one of the squad cars. There's Slindak. What the hell is he doing here? He rolled down the window. Slindak! Slindak turned at his call and strode over to the car. How did you hear about this mess, Quinn? What are you talking about? Did someone leak the results on the Bristol dental records? Slindak shook his head. We haven't heard anything yet. He glanced at Eve. She shouldn't be here. Those reporters are going to recognize her, and they'll surround her like sharks. I'll get someone to take her home. I need you inside, Quinn." He nodded as he jumped out of the car. "Why? What's going on?" "Ellen Bristol answered the phone this morning. It was a phone call from a man who claimed he was the one who killed her daughter. He told her that Janie was the victim that they found in the cave." His lips tightened grimly. "And then he gave her details about exactly what he did to her child." "Oh my God," Eve whispered. She collapsed and her husband grabbed the phone, but the man had hung up. "Ellen Bristol is hysterical, and her husband isn't much better." Slindak muttered a curse as he heard an outcry from the reporters, who were running across the lawn toward them. "Get her out of that car and inside the house. They recognized me." Joe was already around the car and jerking open Eve's door. "Come on, move." Eve was out of the car and running toward the front door, but she was too late. They'd recognized Eve as well. She was surrounded by reporters and photographers. Bulbs were flashing in her face. Questions were being hammered at her. "What are you doing here, Miss Duncan? Did you receive a similar call? Has your daughter's body been found?" "No comment." Joe muscled his way through the mob and took her wrist and pulled her toward the front door. "She's just here as a gesture of sympathy toward the Bristols. Now give her space, damn it." "Inside." Slindak was throwing open the front door. Joe pushed Eve over the threshold, then followed her and turned to the reporters. "You'll get a story when we have one to give." He slammed the door. Eve was pressed against the wall of the foyer. She shuddered. "I felt as if they were going to devour me. No wonder you were so wary of the media when I first came down here." He turned to a tall, dark-haired officer who was standing attention just inside the living room. "Where is Mrs. Bristol?" "Upstairs with the doctor and her husband, Agent Quinn." The officer shook his head. "She's in a bad way." "What a surprise." Eve drew a ragged breath. "I'm surprised she's not in the hospital. But what I want to know is how all these reporters knew about that call. Surely the Bristols didn't phone them." "You'll have to ask Detective Slindak." "I intend to do that," Joe said. "Do you know when the Bristols received the call?" "About 9:40 this morning. We were called in about 10. The media started arriving about 10:55. It was all happening pretty..." "Shit." Slindak barreled through the door and slammed it behind him. "I felt like a damn rock star. They were practically tearing me apart." He looked at Eve. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "I should be used to it, but I'm not." "I'll have an officer drive you home as soon as I can." "No, you won't," Joe said. "They'll follow and camp out. I'll find some place else for her." "That doesn't matter," Eve said impatiently. "What happened here? How did those reporters know that Ellen Bristol got that call?" "They got calls themselves. At least CNN and Atlanta Constitution received calls from the killer. The other stations were tipped off when they started moving." "What kind of calls?" Joe asked. "Similar to the one Ellen Bristol received." Slindak paused. "And they were told that Ellen Bristol had been phoned. I suppose just to make sure that she was roasted over the fires. Over the flames a little more." "How vindictive can you be?" Eve asked. "Evidently, there aren't any bounds," Joe said. "What was the content of the call? And are we sure? It wasn't just some weirdo wanting to take credit for the murder? He could have read the newspaper account the hunters had given." Slindak shook his head. "He knew other details. The placement of the body, the fact that one of her tennis shoes was thrown in the far corner." He paused. "I think that he killed her, Joe. Then why don't you catch him? The man who had spoken was coming down the stairs. George Bristol was a man in his early 40s, with a high forehead and blue eyes that were glittering with moisture. Why did you let him do this to us? Why did you let him do this to Janie? I'm sorry, Mr. Bristol, Slindak said quietly. I don't wish to intrude on your grief, but I wonder if I could speak to you regarding the call. It would help us to track him. I didn't talk to him. Ellen was the only one, and she can't talk to anyone right now. It nearly drove her into hysterics telling me what he said. You'll have to make do with my report. He had reached the bottom of the stairs, and his glance fell on Eve, leaning against the wall. You're Eve Duncan. Yes. Last night, when I heard they'd found a little girl in that cave, I hoped it was your daughter. Terrible, isn't it? But I hoped it was anyone's daughter but mine. Anyone but Janie. I understand, Eve said unsteadily. Yes, you would understand. He closed his eyes for an instant, then opened them. What are you doing here? I wanted to help. I didn't know about... I wanted to help. Thank you, but you can't help us. No one can. You can't bring my baby back. You can't stop those foul things that monster did to her. Do you know what he said when Ellen asked for his name? He said to call him Zeus because he was as powerful as a god. He could reach out and take and destroy, and no one could ever stop him. And then he started to tell my wife what he meant. Ellen said he sounded as if he liked it, that he was proud. He shook his head in wonder. He'd have to be Satan to enjoy hurting a sweet little girl like Janie. Maybe he is Satan. Do you think that could be true? I don't know, Eve said. Whoever he is, I hope we can catch and punish him. I want him punished. I'd like to kill him myself, but it's too late for Janie. He turned back to Slindak. If you'll send someone, I'll give a statement, but I can't leave my wife. That won't be necessary, Slindak said gently. I'll have someone here later today if you think you won't be too tired to do it. I can do it. He started back up the stairs. It doesn't matter if I'm tired. It has to be done. One more question, Mr. Bristol, Joe said. Was there any accent, any indication of where the caller might be from? Southern accent, Midwest, New York? Did he sound like anyone to whom she might previously have spoken? I think Ellen would have told me if she recognized the voice, and she wasn't concerned with accent. She was listening to what he was saying. He was going slowly up the stairs. I believe that's all she'll ever remember. If you get the opportunity, would you ask her? Joe asked. Don't expect anything anytime soon. The doctor is going to keep her unconscious for a little while, then bring her back very slowly. He's hoping to keep her from having a complete breakdown. He looked back over his shoulder at Eve. I'll pray for you. I can afford to do it now, but I don't think it will do any good. If I can help you... Eve broke off as George Bristol turned the corner of the stairs and was lost to view. She turned to Joe, her eyes swimming with tears. Why? Why would he call and taunt them? Joe didn't answer. He turned to Slindak. Did the newspaper or TV station he called manage to tape or trace the call? No, the calls were made one after the other with no advance notice. They weren't expecting it. He asked for the program director at CNN. The newspaper, he asked for Brian McVeigh, who wrote the article in this morning's paper. McVeigh tried to put him on hold and stall, but he hung up. Damn. But at least we can talk to them and ask the questions we can't ask Ellen Bristol. If they'll answer. Slindak said sourly. They may want to protect their story. They'll answer, Joe said grimly. They'll tell me everything I want to know. He turned back to Eve. Come on, I'll check you into my hotel. Those reporters may be camped out in front of your house. He took out his car keys and tossed them to Slindak. Get one of your officers to drive my car outside the subdivision to the gas station on the corner and leave it there. Eve and I will go out the back door, cut across the yard, and try to lose ourselves in the subdivision. Slindak nodded. It's your best shot. You'll probably be seen, but we've ordered the media not to trespass on the Bristol's property. He made a face. Not that they don't break the rules when the stakes seem high enough, but it will give you a little time. He gave the keys to the officer guarding the door. You heard him, Duncan. See if you can't lose them if they follow you. Then report back here. As the door closed behind him, he turned back to Joe. This is nasty, but it may be a break for us. At least we're not dealing with a phantom any longer. No, I think that the Bristols would agree that it wasn't a phantom that savaged them today, Joe said. I'll go out in front and give a statement, Slindak said. That should distract them until you get out of here. Thanks. He took Eve's arm. Let's see if we can find that back door. She nodded. The kitchen. She was already moving down the hall. There it is to the right. A moment later, they were on the deck outside the kitchen door. A chain-link fence. No back gate. We go over the fence, he said. Then cross the backyard next door and keep on moving. At the end of the block, we turn north 1 block and double back toward the subdivision entrance. Okay? She nodded and ran down the steps. Stop planning and start moving. He glanced around but couldn't spot any media. That didn't mean they weren't under observation, but Slindak might have drawn them away. They might get lucky. He followed Eve, who was already across the yard and had entered the bed of daffodils bordering the fence. She slipped and almost fell. Be careful, mud. He nodded. Irrigation. There's a price for these nice lawns and landscapes. He helped her across the fence and climbed after her. Run! Joe glanced over his shoulder as he opened the car door for Eve at the gas station. I think we made it. I'll drive around for 5 or 10 minutes to make sure that we're not being followed. I feel as if I'm in some Alfred Hitchcock movie, jumping over fences, dodging from yard to yard, she said as she got into the car. This isn't right. It's not the media that we should be afraid of. We're not afraid. He drove out of the gas station onto the street. We're just avoiding any unnecessary annoyance and getting you to a place where you'll not be hurt by their questions. You look like a butterfly being stabbed by a dozen pins when they surround you. You got me away from them. She was gazing out of the window. I'm used to the reporters now. I was more shocked by what had happened to the Bristols than I was about being attacked by them. I was just too stunned to react. It was the last thing I expected. She looked at him. You didn't answer me. He called those people and the media. He hadn't done anything like that before. Do you have any idea why he would do it now? Maybe. Ellen Bristol said that he sounded proud when he told her about killing Janie. Eve shuddered. Horrible. Yes, but it may be the key to why he made the call. He's proud of his cleverness. He's proud that he's managed to kill and never been close to being caught. Then why would he be this reckless and risk everything? But you see, no one knows how clever he is. No one knows what power he has. It may have been enough for him to have this delicious secret for all these years, but now that his confidence has grown, and he thinks that no one can touch him, he's ready to be admired by one and all. He even gave himself a name, Zeus, so that there's no question of anonymity. Power, she murmured. Who has more power than a god? and Zeus was far from virtuous and completely absorbed in his power. The choice was logical. Is that hunger for fame common in serial killers? It's not uncommon. Some are satisfied to stay beneath the radar for their entire career. Others get restless and want to thumb their noses at authority and show their power. My guess is that maybe when they found the remains of that little boy by the freeway, he got a taste of notoriety. He got a taste of notoriety and liked it. Then when the news story appeared in the paper this morning, he was primed to exploit it and show everyone what a truly superior fiend he was. That call to the media wasn't only to twist the knife in the Bristol family. He was hungry for more attention, more fame. He shrugged. But often, that need for public attention only lasts for a limited amount of time, and they go underground again. So he may not make any other calls. As I said, it's not predictable. But if he did call again, you'd have a chance of catching him. The newspapers wouldn't be caught off guard again. They'd be prepared. You could set up ways to trace him. But Slindak said this may be a break in the case. Damn it. Stop being negative. I told you I'd never lie to you. Any change in the status quo offers opportunities, but it's not a sure thing. I've briefed you on all the theories and my experience with them, and that's all I can do. So what are you going to do? Are we still going to the shoe factory downtown? No, I'll give that job to one of Slindak's men. I have to go and question Brian McVeigh and that program director from CNN, he added emphatically. And you are not going with me. I want answers, and all I'd get would be questions from them if you were within viewing distance. I'm not arguing. I realize I'd be a distraction. Since the moment he'd seen her. As I said, you can check into the Hyatt. The media may still track you down, but we won't make it easy for them. She shook her head. Too expensive. I'll be fine at the house. I'll put you on my expense account. You wouldn't do that. You're too honest, which means you'd probably be paying for it out of your own pocket. One night. Just enough time to take the heat off, he coaxed. Otherwise, I'd feel obligated to camp out in front of your house. It's worth paying for your room just to make sure I get a good night's sleep. It's not worth it to me, she paused. There's a cheap motel about 2 miles from the house. I'll check in there with my mother for tonight. I don't need the Hyatt. She made a face. I'm no fancy Easterner who has to have room service and concierge. Yeah, guys like me need a lot of care and nurturing. Otherwise, we just wither away. Where is this motel? I'll take you there. Then go to your house and pick up your mother and have her choose some clothes to pack for you. I can call her. Where is the hotel? He repeated. It's the Rainbow Inn on Piedmont. Sounds very whimsical. Not very. You'll turn up your nose at it. She leaned warily back in the seat. Ask me if I care. After my stint in the Middle East, it takes a lot to make me turn up my nose. If it has a shower, I'm good with it. It has a shower. She was silent for a moment. Mr. Bristol said he'd pray for me. I'd rather he prayed for Bonnie, but he doesn't think she's alive. When he was talking, I was having trouble. I still have a chance. Things were different in her pattern from the other children I have a chance. George Bristol is a man in pain. He probably doesn't realize what he's saying. He knows. She was silent again. We've got to find that monster, Joe. For all those children, their parents, for Bonnie. He mustn't be allowed to be proud of killing any more children. He's got to be stopped. For Bonnie. She was getting closer and closer to accepting that her daughter could be dead. That's what we're trying to do. Not trying. We've got to do it. She didn't speak again until they arrived at the Rainbow Inn. He gazed at the small one-story economy motel skeptically. It appeared in fair repair, but had probably been built at least 30 years before. Definitely no whimsy. You sure it has a shower? I'm sure. She got out of the car. And telephones. Will you call me after you talk to CNN and Brian McVeigh? He nodded. Or I'll tell you in person after I've finished with them. And I'll bring your mother here. I'll call her and tell her to come in my car. I might need it. No, she might be followed, and all this would be for nothing. I'll make sure we're not tailed. Do you need anything besides a change of clothes? Tell her to bring my notebook and that box of missing persons reports. I have to go over something. I have to go over everything again. There has to be something there that we missed. She moved toward the office, and there was a touch of despair mixed with the frustration in her voice. He's being so damn reckless. He has to have done something that will give us a lead. Joe backed the car out of the lot after the door shut behind her. He couldn't blame her. He couldn't blame Eve for the exasperation that had been founded on fear. Today had been a bad day for her, a complete roller coaster ride. She had identified with the Bristols, and George Bristol's certainty that Bonnie was dead had come as a shock. No matter how often she told herself that was a possibility, she couldn't accept that it might be true. How the hell would he handle it when she could no longer deny that the distant horror was a reality? And he could see that nightmare hovering on the horizon. Eve was taking comfort in the experience. Eve was taking comfort in the exceptions, the differences. He was seeing the similarities, and his experience and instincts were scaring him. He could try to prepare her, but at some point she would block him out and stop listening. It would be a purely self-defensive device. Stop worrying about something he couldn't change. He'd face that problem when he had to. He checked the address and phone for the Atlanta Constitution. Now his problem was Brian McVeigh. I don't have to answer your questions, you know. McVeigh leaned back in his chair. I gave Detective Slindak a statement, so I'm not impeding the progress of the investigation. I could send you back to him. You could, Joe said, but you're a young reporter on your way up. You don't want to antagonize anyone if you don't have to. You're going to have enough enemies. You think so? McVeigh chuckled. That's what journalism is all about. A lot of people don't like the truth, particularly in stories like the one you wrote about the hunters finding Janie Bristol's body. It was pretty grisly, but all true. His smile was cocky. It was the first one to get the story, and I ran with it. I was the first one to get the story, and I ran with it. And the public loves a little blood with their morning coffee. You'd know that better than I. McVeigh's smile faded. Don't be patronizing. I've done my research on you. I may write about it, but I don't kill. While I understand you're absolutely terrific at it, who stinks the most, Quinn? I suppose it's a matter of perception, McVeigh nodded. And I'll win a Pulitzer before I'm 30, and you'll still be hunting crazies for the next 20 years. Entirely possible, but you'll not win a Pulitzer by publishing crime scene details just to appeal to the masses. Why not? I gave everyone what they wanted, and I didn't hurt anyone. He met Joe's eyes. I could have described the bits of clothing that would have tipped the ID in Jane Bristol's direction. I didn't go that far. I decided to let the police get a firm ID before I laid that on the Bristols. It was a restraint Joe hadn't expected. It was still a shock to every one of the parents of those missing children. Give me a break. I'm no angel, but I do have a few scruples. As long as they don't get in the way of your Pulitzer. You're laughing, but I meant it. You have to have a goal, and I'm aiming at the big prize. He sat forward, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. And I'm on my way. How would I know that first story on the Hunters would get me an interview with the killer himself? It was fate. No, it was your byline on the story that stroked the monster's ego, Joe said dryly. Whatever. It happened. And next time he calls, I'll have a tape recorder and you think he'll call you again? Why not? I listened. I figured he wanted an audience, and I gave him what he wanted. He grimaced, though it made me want to puke. But anything for a Pulitzer. Well, I did try to ask him questions, but he ran right over me. But that could be good. I didn't make him mad. And that could mean he'll call me again. Lots of reporters have formed relationships, even friendships with killers. I wouldn't count on it. He called CNN too. I don't think you're that special to him. McVeigh's face fell with disappointment. I can hope. In the meantime, I can milk the story for all it's worth. Would you like to comment? I don't have an FBI quote. I'd like a few comments from you. Exchange? It would be easier than using force or threats. Joe nodded. Did he say anything different to you than what he's told Ellen Bristol? McVeigh shook his head. Not from what I can tell from what Slendak told me. He made a big thing about calling himself Zeus. I think he wanted to make sure that I had that for the story. Maybe like the Zodiac Killer or something, all the rest of the details. Something like the Zodiac Killer or something. All the rest of the details were vague except about the murder itself. He was very explicit about that. Would you recognize the voice if you heard it again? Was it distinctive? I'd recognize it. It was deep and smooth. No accents? He shook his head. Hard to tell. Not Southern, just American. Well, that helps, Joe said sarcastically. Sorry, I'm no elocution expert. I've tried to concentrate while he was talking because I knew it would be important, but I couldn't tell anything. He stopped. There was one thing. House. What? He mentioned watching the Bristol house. He said the word a couple of times. House. Only it didn't sound quite the same as we say it. What was the difference? He shook his head. It's hard. It was almost the same. You sure he was American? He nodded. Everything was the same except for that one word. What kind of emotion? What was he feeling? McVeigh thought about it. Excitement, eagerness, pride. He was speaking quickly, with energy. Did he mention any other children? No, not specifically. His eyes suddenly narrowed. You were with Eve Duncan at the Bristol place. Has she been contacted? Nope. Pity. She's interesting. All the other parents are steady, ordinary couples, boring. A young woman who has an illegitimate child sparks the imagination. Why was she at the Bristols? You'll have to ask her. I can't. I tried, but she wasn't at her house. Did you hide her away? No. Why would I do that? Surely you and your colleagues wouldn't bother a grieving woman. You do have some scruples. I'll find her, McVeigh said softly. It's the story of a lifetime, and she's part of it. I don't know what chapter she's in, but I'll find out. Leave her alone, McVeigh. You don't want to deal with me. McVeigh studied him. No, but I'll do it. It would be worth it. He paused and picked up his pencil. Now, what's my quote? The FBI is aiding the investigation of the ATLPD and offering the full services of the Bureau. We're making progress and hope to have a break in the case soon. Got it. McVeigh looked up. Anything else? Yes. Joe turned and started down the aisle toward the door. Go screw yourself. That's all? Eve asked, disappointed. It's more than we had before, he said. We'll have to work with it, but I think you'd better stay away from your house for a few days more. McVeigh is going to be persistent. He's a very ambitious man, and he's got his teeth into this story. I'm not going into hiding. I can't afford it, and it makes me angry. I'm going home tomorrow. He shrugged. I tried. I didn't think I'd succeed. He nodded at the box he brought into the motel room and sat on the coffee table. There are the reports. I suppose you're going to tackle them again? Yes, I'm going to look at Janie Bristol. Did you receive the dental record confirmation? Yes, it came in right before I stopped to pick up your mother. I'm afraid I failed in my mission. She wouldn't come with me. I know. She said if she couldn't spend the night at home, that she'd go stay with Pastor Nambry and his wife. They're always inviting her, she said. It was definitely Janie Bristol? Yes. Poor little girl. She shook her head. Do you know, I just felt a rush of relief. I'm like George Bristol. I wanted it to be anyone but Bonnie. He said he was terrible. I guess we're all ruthless when it comes to protecting our children. She paused. If I still have a daughter to protect. She went on haltingly. But I was thinking about what you said about that skull being hard to ID, unless you knew where to find the dental records. What if you didn't have any idea who that victim was? She might be lost forever. Maybe buried by the county in a nameless grave with her parents never knowing. It breaks my heart to think about it. There are a lot of victims like that, aren't there, Joe? He nodded. Too many. It breaks my heart, she repeated. What if it were? She drew a deep breath and gestured to the boxes. Thank you for bringing these. That sounds like a dismissal. You don't want to go over these records again. Things are moving for you. You have things to do. And you don't want me to be here. She met his gaze. No, I don't. I have some thinking to do, and I want to be alone to do it. I don't want to be soothed or protected. I've been leaning on you too much. I haven't noticed. And I don't want to look at you and know you're wondering how I'll survive when I find out my Bonnie is dead, she added jerkily. You've been very kind, but I need a break from you, Joe. Get out of my life for a while. He hadn't realized he was that transparent to her. But Eve was intelligent and more savvy about people than anyone he had run across. Even upset as she had been today, she had managed to pick up on all the signals he had not wanted her to see. Damage control was clearly necessary. What about throwing me out after dinner? You'll have to eat, and I bet this place doesn't have room service. She smiled faintly. I've been rude as hell, and you still try to take care of me. It's beginning to be a habit. I like it. I never had a cat or a puppy when I was a kid. I was always envious of the kids on TV who had animals. You're supplying a need. Her smile widened. You're nuts. I refuse to be a substitute for Lassie. Dinner? Her smile faded. No, I meant it. I need to be alone and think. What happened today, mate? It could open a door. What door? I don't know. That's why I have to think about it. she added pointedly, without you to question me while I'm doing it. She was determined. Okay, back off before she tossed him out on the permanent basis. No problem. He turned away. If I hear anything that might interest you, I'll be in touch. Call me if you need me. Thanks, Joe. You're welcome. He smiled at her over his shoulder. But I'll stop at that pizza restaurant across the street and ask them to deliver a pizza and a drink to you in about an hour. Joe, I'd do the same for Lassie. His smile vanished as he shut the door and strode toward his car. It was going to be hard as hell to give her space. He wanted to hover, build a wall, keep all the ugliness away from her. And he didn't like the fact that she was distancing herself from him. She had gone through a tremendously painful experience at the Bristols. Instead of it drawing her closer to him, she had become quieter, more independent. He had been almost able to see her strengthen as each blow had struck her. If he hadn't cared before, that courage would have made him love her. He stopped at the pizza restaurant and sat in the car for a moment. No, he couldn't go back. He would do what he told her he'd do. Be patient, keep in contact, but give her a moderate amount of space. Do his job and find the bastard who had killed her Bonnie, and be ready to catch Eve when she was downed by that final, horrible blow.